And talking about dialogue and collaboration, I noticed that on 12th of March 2015, the Chancellor, George Osborne, announced that the UK actually planned to become one of the first group of founding members for the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, AIIB. And although at the same time the United States might be a little bit reserved in their response towards that. So I'm quite curious, what's your comments about the fact that Britain became the first major Western country to join the AIIB?
I wasn't, needless to say, part of the process, but it seems to me a very sensible decision. I mean, China is important, huge, massive player, and this is an important Asian initiative, and the classic British view would always be to be as influential as we can be in the evolving institutions that matter.
The interesting thing is, there has been some news reports, from Financial Times recently, and they are saying, because Britain does not, really follow the America's, strategy on the AIIB and some of the other, related policy. So there has been a news article just basically saying the White House no longer sees anything special in UK relations. What's your opinion?
I think that our relationship with America has been a very good one. But I've never been one to think that there are things called special relationships which override, and this is the important point, which override national self-interest. I don't think that China is going to look at any other country and say, well, we may not agree with them, but they're friends and therefore we'll help them. I don't think you can do that. I think that within the complexities of the ruling party in China, there'd be too much opposition. And so you can only behave in a way that suits the national self-interest. China will do it, we will do it, America will do it. With America, our national self-interest has coincided historically to the world's great benefit, without the slightest shadow of doubt. And we also, of course, you've got to look historically. I mean, a huge number of Americans came from Western Europe, and many of them from Brits. And we were, one of the great fortunes for this country is that the English language became spread through the world very much as a result of American capitalism. So there's a very good relationship. But the idea that it's very important for politicians not to get hooked on the idea that countries can behave in a way that doesn't suit their national self-interest.
That's absolutely true. I completely agree. So how do you describe the relationship between China and Britain at this moment? Do you think it could be a new form of special relations at a new time?
I can tell you the most formative moment in my life in answering that question was when we came to discuss in the cabinet the handover of 1997. And this would have been 14 years before, so we're back in the early 80s, 83. And we had to resolve the issue of 97 and 83 because the Hong Kong mortgage rates are 14 years. So people, if they didn't know what was going to happen in 97, there could have been financial difficulties. And I remember very clearly the discussion that took place. And we all knew Chinese were coming in 97. There's no question of not coming to an agreement. But I remember saying that instead of this being a sort of grudging, resentful, we wish it wasn't type approach, I said this is the opportunity for a great new sense of relationships with China. And so the success of the transformation and the transfer of Hong Kong was to me an opening of a door. And I've always seen it like that.
Obviously, you're also very interested in the role between Britain and Europe. And recently one of the senior leaders from European Commission is currently visiting Beijing as part of the 40 years diplomatic ties between China and Europe. So one of the issues they are talking about now is how Europe could play a more active part in the One Belt and the One Road initiative by the President Xi Jinping. I was quite curious, what kind of role do you think Britain might play in this quite exciting strategy?
Look, this is China's strategy.
Okay.
This is back to the 1970s. This is where China has seen the new horizons for itself. And if China has made up its mind to go that way, and it obviously has, and it's a very exciting idea, it very much extends Chinese self-interest, and that's what's going to happen. What does Britain do about it? Well, I think your question about the new Asian fund, banking fund, is an example of what Britain can do. We have a self-interest in being involved in any way appropriate, either to Britain itself, through our companies, or as members of the European Union. And we should do so with enthusiasm and not skepticism. And we should try to make sure that British self-interests are served to the best of our ability. That's what our responsibility is.
And also talking about that, also next year, China will be hosting the G20 summit.
Yeah.
And obviously, a lot of economists and politicians have been talking a lot about that. So do you think there will be any exciting, opportunities or challenges presenting China?
Well, if they can find them, the journalists will find them in order to sort of create the maximum tension and disruption. But no, I don't think so. I think that I keep coming back to this point about the stability of Chinese policy. Yeah. Chinese have made up their mind what they're going to do and how they're going to do it, and they've proved over 40 years that they can do it. So anyone who doubts that is spitting in the wind of history.
That's very, kind of you to say so.
No, at all. I wouldn't be kind. I'm merely observing what I know to have been the experience. And I did mention it to you. I was sitting at a lunch in 1973 with a Chinese, I think I said that at the dinner that you were at in 1973, when a Chinese delegation came to this country, and it was a routine occasion, and I was standing in for another minister, actually, so it had no significance. And this guy on my right started telling me about what was going to happen in China over the next 30 years. And I couldn't believe a word of it. I mean, he was talking about enterprise and competition, and this was a communist society we were talking about in the 70s. And he explained all these things. So I, from the earliest days, have been, so to speak, a spectator at what has then happened. And there was another very interesting example of this. Again, in the 70s, I was Minister of Shipping here. And I got to know all the big Chinese ship owners in Hong Kong, YK Pao and Xie Chung and people like that. And they were in and out of my office because they had big interests in maritime matters, so they came to see me. And the first time one of them said to me, I've just come back from Beijing. Well, why not? But every time I saw one of them, oh yeah, I've just come back from Beijing. And I thought, well, that's odd. This is Hong Kong, there's not anywhere near being integrated back into China. And these guys are great international capitalists, But of course, what happened is that the Chinese, in my view, they may not agree with this, they may not want to admit it, the Chinese mainland got hold of the Chinese in Hong Kong. And they said, look, boys, we're coming, let's get wise. Now, all we've got to do is to integrate Guangzhou into Hong Kong, and you can keep your financial services industries. And they did. And they started doing it decades before the handover. Brilliant. And of course, if you go to Zhuhai, it's Macau. Incredible. I went into Zhuhai with this massive airport, no planes. I drove into the center of Zhuhai in 6-lane highway, no cars. I mean, quite extraordinary experience.
I remember, reading some of the interviews you have been given to different journalists, and you're talking about, the aviation capacity of Britain, where you are saying, with the same kind of amount of time, China probably will build a lot more, airport already, and we are still here waiting.
Yeah, of course. Well, but, you know, if you're talking about China in 100 years' time, you'll have the same problems we've got, because human societies become, as they become more prosperous, they become more opinionated, they have more at stake. And one of the big things that it's an asset, but it's also a difficulty, is that as you have home ownership, so planning becomes a very, very important part of life, and people protect their homes that they've owned and saved for and all that. Now, your emerging middle classes haven't become that powerful in political terms as ours have, and but you go on the rate you are, you're going to have very powerful middle classes who will have massive political strength. How in China that works out will be one of the most fascinating things to see. Will the Communist Party be able to absorb and sort of synthesize that into a collective national view? We can't do it here. See what you do.
I guess that's probably one of the reasons President Xi Jinping came out with the idea, really exciting idea about the Chinese dream, which is something he believes that not only every ordinary Chinese citizen could share, but also our friends overseas like you could also have like Chinese dream. So what's your understanding about the Chinese dream?
Well, you know, people say to me, what's new in politics? I always say read Shakespeare. And I'm pretty sure he got it all from the Greeks. I don't think there's anything new in politics. Politics is about human beings, human ambitions, human aspirations, human defensive mechanisms. And it hasn't changed throughout history, and nor will it.
So you think, you know, there is quite fundamental things in the Chinese dream with a lot of different, you know, political ideology?
Well, I think that political ideology is playing an increasingly smaller role in China's evolving political structure. Now, that's not to say that your structure is like ours, because it isn't. But I would need to be Chinese and involved to really understand how your system works. I think I have a feel, but I wouldn't dare put my views in writing, because I'm not sure they'd stand up. But I think you have this most incredible communication process through the Communist Party, which somehow manages to pick up enough consensus to be able to find a common way through. And we don't do that. We have a big outside row all the time. We have the press on all sides, we have different parties, we have rows, great public debate. I think you'll move increasingly in that direction. Indeed, I think you are moving in that direction. I mean, when I first went to China, your ability to talk to Chinese people was enormously constrained. It was quite obvious to me in the early days in the 70s that the people who I was introduced to, the ordinary people, say, in the aerospace industry, they were apprehensive. They wouldn't say anything. If they did, it was a very straight sort of answer to a question that had been prepared, you know, that sort of thing. Now, I've had private conversations with Chinese at serious level, which are totally open, totally frank, very critical of the government in private, but not yet in public.
I see. That's a very good observation, you know.
Well, I'm only telling you what one humble observer, and I think friend of China, observes after 40 years. I'm not speaking for the British government or the Conservative Party or anybody. I'm just saying what I personally have observed and enjoyed.
Definitely. And actually, talking about aerospace, I know one of your first, you know, position in the government is actually the Minister for Aerospace. And in recent years, there has been some high-level, you know, collaboration between UK and China on aerospace-related, you know, projects. And what do you think might be the future, you know, challenges and opportunity in this kind of area, because it's very much high-tech, you know, scientific, you know, driven?
Yeah, well, that's where China wants to be. And is. I mean, they are a space nation, for goodness sake. So, of course, China will seek collaboration in high-tech fields, and Britain is a high-tech nation at the forefront of many technologies, so we are natural partners. Aviation, well, you've only got to look at the number of Chinese who want to move, fly, and you realize it's a market of undreamt scale. You know.
Yeah, and potentially that can be a quite big, manufacture area to create more jobs for British people.
Yeah, it will. Yes, certainly. But there it is. It's self-evident. One of the dramatic growth sectors of this century.